Hello, everybody, and welcome to The Scares That Shaped Us, a podcast about horror writers and the stories that made them. I'm your host, Matthew Jackson, and we have got a fun one for you. It's the last regular episode of 2024. It's the last episode before Christmas, and we are making good on a promise that I made and that one of our guests made in the very first episode of this show. If you listened to our first episode, you might remember that it was a chat with Clay McLeod Chapman about Session 9. And in the process of having that conversation, we discovered that we are both huge fans of Black Christmas, which turns 50 this year. So I said, hey, come back and talk about Black Christmas with me in December. And Clay said, sure. And a few months later, he said, sure again. And so here we are. We have a supersized, really fun, insightful, silly conversation about all things Black Christmas between Clay and I. I think you're going to love it. But because it is a very long conversation, I'm not going to do any recommendations this week. I'm just going to get right to our interview portion of the show. It's a lot of fun. We're going to talk about the movie. We're going to talk about Clay's new book, Wake Up and Open Your Eyes. So let's head right over to our interview with Clay McLeod Chapman. Joining us for this special holiday episode of The Scares That Shaped Us is our first ever guest, our first ever friend of the show. He is the host of Fearmongers. He is the author of books like Ghost Eaters and this coming January's Wake Up and Open Your Eyes, which you'll definitely want to check out. Clay McLeod Chapman, welcome back.
Hey, am I the first repeater as well? Do I
You
get
are.
to? Ah, yes!
You are our very first repeat guest. Yeah.
Oh yeah! It's so I get so little in this world, in this life, but I get to claim that one.
Yes. You are first guest, first repeat guest. Hell, if we plan this right, if as long as we both hang in there, you could be the last guest whenever I decide to hang it up. We could do it again.
Just send an email like Clay, you're 81. You're on your deathbed. Do you have it in you to do one more? And I'll be like, Samantha. What? Or Rosebud.
We will find out. Like you'll make deathbed. I never really liked horror.
I love rom-coms.
Yeah, it's great to have you back. It's great to have you as the first repeat guest. It's always fun to talk to you for this and so many other reasons, not just the deathbed confession bits.
The
But
Invention of Lying is a terrible movie.
you know what it is? I saw that movie in the theater and like, no, never again with that movie.
You know, it's embarrassing. I was actually the joke I was trying to make was, what is that because I was like trying to think of like a rom-com to pick, and and of course I couldn't pull it out. But what's the one with Paul? The guy's like slapping the bass.
Oh, that's I Love You, Man. I love that movie.
You love that movie?
Yeah.
Would you watch that movie again? Like,
I have watched that movie repeatedly, dude. That is a comfort movie for me. Paul Rudd and Jason Segel, and they go to a Rush concert in the middle of it. Of course, I love that movie.
The bass. Okay, maybe that's a little like that's an unfair comparison, but like I find that like most rom-coms, like, oh my God, am I gonna make a blanket statement and then get in trouble? You watch them once, and then that's it. Like they're kind of in and out of your system.
As someone who genuinely likes rom-coms, I will say that is probably largely true.
Mm-hmm.
There are lots of rom-coms that I have seen and thought, well, I'm probably never going to watch that again, but I had a pleasant time watching it.
Yeah.
And then there are the ones that I will just keep going back to, like You've Got Mail and The Holiday and I don't even know if I Love You, Man. I mean, it's a bromantic comedy because it's about two guys becoming best friends, I guess. But
yeah,
it follows the rom-com rhythms. So
the Ghosts of Boyfriends Past. How many times have you watched that one?
Ghosts of Girlfriends Past.
Girlfriends
starring Matthew McConaughey.
That one.
I have seen that one exactly one time. Yeah, as a film critic, I tend to see a lot, obviously, and then there are a lot of them that I'm just like I barely remember that movie. I think Emma
Yeah.
Stone is in it as like a girl from the '80s who was his
Oh
first
wow.
first girlfriend or something like that. And I think
Wow.
Jennifer Garner's in it. I don't remember, but
Yeah.
I remember seeing it in a theater in Huntsville, Texas, back when I lived in Huntsville, Texas, and did that stuff. But hey, we're not here to talk about rom-coms. We are here to fulfill a prophecy. On the very first episode of this show in August of 2024, we said that we both love Black Christmas, and you were going to come back and do Black Christmas for our Christmas episode, and that is what
Ah,
is happening.
yes. The
And
prophecy has been fulfilled.
yes, and we are going to talk about the greatest Christmas horror movie ever made, and I say that fully aware that there are lots of other great Christmas horror movies, especially now. But before we do that, I want to talk a little bit about Wake Up and Open Your Eyes, because this is the next Clay McLeod Chapman novel, your follow up to What Kind of Mother. You've had shorter works since then. You've had Stay on the Line and Kill Your Darlings,
Yeah,
or Kill
yeah.
Your Darling. It's just Kill Your Darling, isn't it?
Yeah, just
Yeah,
kill one. Only
yeah.
one this
Just
time.
just one darling, everybody.
One's enough. One's enough. One and done.
This is the new novel. If you wouldn't mind setting up for the listeners what they can expect from this one.
Pain,
Yeah.
trauma, um, bad touch, bad touch. I mean, okay, so wake up and open your eyes is, like just imagine, hypothetically speaking, that half of the country was possessed by demons. That's what I got. That's my,
Which which half, Clay? Just a
well,
random
see,
half?
but that's the thing. That's the catch. Which half totally depends on where you get your news from. Where is your, where do you get your info, your intel? Is it social media? Is it 24-hour news cable networks? Is it, like I think that at first blush it's kind of low hanging fruit, but then the deeper into the book it goes, maybe it gets a little like just like maybe a little more complex, a little more complicated. um but yeah, it's a fucking fuckity fuck of a book. So I don't know, man.
This is well, what I wanted to ask you about is like this is an area where you have explored this previously in other work. This sort of connection to the way we consume news. I'm sorry, I'm blanking on the name of your podcast right now.
Oh, that thing, the quiet part loud.
Quiet Part Loud, yes.
Yeah, yeah.
You kind of did the sort of news personality conspiracy theory thing with that, and then you had a short story that I think was it in Gabino Iglesias's found
Yeah,
footage
found
anthology,
anthology. Yeah.
and I believe it was called The Spew of News,
Oh, it definitely was.
and it very much like reading the opening pages of this, I was like, oh, that story was like a trial run for Clay of some of these ideas. So, like,
Yeah.
how long have you been mulling over what this eventually became?
Oh, 2016, maybe.
Oh, sure, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. A couple
You
things
know,
happened. Couple things happened that year.
yeah. It's just it's funny because like, how do I talk about this fucking book? I don't even fucking know. Like I'm woefully like emotionally unprepared because like, the book is not coming out until January, which is a month away. But I still haven't got my spiel down. So it's all just rough and raw and just pure emotion, which I think I'm gonna just keep doing because that's what the book is, frankly.
Yeah,
I don't I don't want to have a clear and concise, soundbite for this one because it would feel just kind of disingenuous. But I wrote it because I have family that has transitioned from, say, one kind of mode of thinking to a completely different mode of thinking, and I've bared witness to that kind of shift, paradigm shift in their kind of attitude towards politics, towards people, towards you name it. And it's scary. It's fucking terrifying, man. It's the
yeah,
worst feeling in the world. And I don't know. I don't know how to rectify it because these are people that I love. And wake up and open your eyes is the kind of existential wail of what do you do when you lose people to their their news? Um, but yeah, it totally started with Spew of the News. That story was, I mean, like it, you could almost take that story, and that's like the first 10 pages
Yeah.
of this book. But it then it goes kind of goes in its own direction and becomes something, maybe not completely different, but it embodies a larger kind of lens to not just view this particular the family that was in this short story and like just go for a macro kind of world view, global view, or I guess I should
Yeah.
say national view.
Yeah. I mean, I was telling you this before we started recording, but I'm on like I'm a Clay McLeod Chapman fan. Like people know this, and I have talked about the emotional impact that Ghost Eaters and What Kind of Mother had on me. Like Ghost Eaters hit me as a recovering alcoholic, and What Kind of Mother hit me as a new parent. And this book, I have not, admittedly, I have not finished it yet, but the first, however long that first section is, 60, 70 pages, something like that.
Mm.
And I don't want to I don't want to give anything away, but the way you choose to open this book is some of the most upsetting, visceral, and frightening stuff I think you've ever written.
Mm.
And then the way that you choose to, like you said, you sort of zoom out from that
Hmm.
once that's happened, and you get this larger view of like, okay, well that is really upsetting and freaky, but why?
Hmm.
And it becomes this really great. It's up there with, like, I think, CJ Lee did it this year with American Rapture, which comes at it from a different place. That's more of like a faith book. It's more of a
Hmm.
book about the way that religion is treated in this country, and yours comes at it more from the media side. But they it's obviously a thing that's on everyone's minds, and I gotta tell you, from my own perspective, just as a writer myself, I can't imagine doing it. I can't imagine what you and CJ and other writers like Chuck Wendig did a version of this with Wanderers. I
Yeah.
can't imagine sitting in that space for the amount of time it takes to write a novel. So I'm just like, I don't want to make it as simple as Clay McLeod Chapman, are you okay? But I do want to ask, like, what it was like for you to, because obviously it comes from an emotional place for you too.
Yeah. I mean, it's amazing that you mentioned CJ. Like we both got to read each other's books kind of early-ish, uh, in the process, just so that, because like once we both kind of realized what we were writing about, like there was that moment of like, oh my God, are we writing the same book? Um, and we swapped manuscripts, and there's definitely that moment of like, okay, whew, they're separate beasts and kind of come at a kind of similar thought, but from very different perspectives. And
Yeah.
I mean, I will totally cop to the fact that American Rapture is my favorite book of this year. Like that and Incidents Around the House are just like the
Hmm.
best. Like I just love those fucking books with so much passion that like I just can't stand it. Like I American Rapture is just, it's an amazing book. And for me, to answer your question, I mean, no, I'm not all right. Like I'm fucking awful. Like it's just like life sucks. And the book is this, it's strange because I don't know. Like I I started thinking about it in like 2016, 2017, 2018, 2019, 2020, like and started kind of writing it in earnest what after What Kind of Mother, which would have to be like what 2023 maybe 20 at the end of 2022. And it I just lived in it, like I lived in
Hmm.
that book for a long time. And you I mean, I don't know. There's nothing to say other than just like it, it's chaos, it's anarchy, it's trauma, it's pain. It's like, and maybe the only other book that I would want to credit kind of giving me the writer permission to try to write something kind of unrelenting uh, is Tell Me I'm Worthless by
Mm,
Alison Rumfitt.
yeah, that's a great book.
Oh my God, I love that book. And when I read that book, like that book is suffocating. That book is like it it actually, I mean, like it I felt traumatized by that book. And the education for me is like, okay, well, here's a book that like doesn't let up on you. It doesn't give you air. And it hurts you. Like you come out the other end and you're screwed. Um I don't know. I don't know. I just feel like I wanted to emulate that.
I mean, I think you pulled it off, but I also, it is a heavy book, but I think you sort of it is the kind of primal scream that I think that a lot of people will be hungry for. I mean, obviously, like we all hoped that January of 2025 would look differently than it's apparently going to look. Um, but I think it's gonna be a book that comes along at the right time for a lot of people and hits them where they live in a way that is gonna be upsetting, and it's like not an easy read necessarily, but I mean this is Clay we're talking about. Like he gets in the real shit, but I do think it's going to hit people at a time where they can just go, yes, fuck, finally, like someone wrote this book that, because you're right, it does capture that, like, oh my God, what am I supposed to do about this
Mhm.
feeling that I think so many of us have had for so long now.
Yeah. Your lips to 10 gazillion readers' ears, because like I don't know how I don't know how do you tell people about a book? Like, hey, buy my book. Like this is I don't know. Like whoever the friggin' fraggedy frack publishing gods are, like I just hope that someone out there says, I pardon thee. Like I just want somebody to kind of like ordain it as the thing that people though because like I feel like those people who are gonna want to read it might not even know about it. And I don't know. I don't know. I'm yammering now, but
Well, I
this is where
I'm
my
gonna
head is.
do I'm gonna do everything I can to get the word out and starting here. Everyone, go pre-order it. Go find Wake Up and Open Your Eyes. It's Quirk Books is putting it out in January. Go pre-order it. You're gonna like it. Thank me later. It will be. It is. I haven't written this list yet, but I'll tell you, it's one of my most anticipated horror novels of 2025. That'll be up at Pace. So everybody, go get Wake Up and Open Your Eyes. And but we're not going to talk about this super dark horror story anymore. We're going to talk about a much happier, lighter horror story that turns 50 this year. It is
Oh my God.
Bob Clark's 1974 slasher classic Black Christmas. And yeah, I this is in my like top 10 horror films of all time. It's up there with, we were doing a thing when Blue Sky started to kind of pop off again a few weeks ago. Everyone was doing like 10 horror movies to get to know me, and I was listing off all these like what Lake Mungo and Alien
Hmm.
and Halloween and a few other things, and I was like, oh, but you got to watch Black Christmas too because it is this perfect intersection. I love Christmas. I was raised in a family of Christmas nerds, and so when I got super into horror, I was like, well, there has to be a good like crossover here, and this movie just hits me right in that sweet spot between scary and cozy. So because you are also, I know, a huge fan of this, I want to ask you what your first experience with Black Christmas was.
Huh. I would go as far as to say this is top five.
Mm.
Um, and I have some very complicated feelings about this movie as it's kind of aged, but it is profoundly it affects me in ways that like I love this movie so much, and I feel like I love it so much that I feel like I'm willing to kind of talk about its shortcomings and its kind of relationship with the kind of film world at large. But my personal experience is I came to it late.
Mm.
And like I want to cop to being old. Like I'm of an age where, I could go to the video store and rent VHS.
Yeah.
And like I was of a certain generation, and I did not see this movie until my junior year of high school. And I'm copying to that in a way that feels very late to me personally,
Mm.
because I mean I was imbibing horror movies for years, like like seven on, and of course like all the kind of like mainstays like Halloween and Friday the 13th and Nightmare on Elm Street, and all the movies that would come out, like I would see it. And at that point, I feel like the only Christmas movie that was on the map was Silent Night, Deadly Night. And
Yeah.
I had not heard of Black Christmas until late into my junior year. And I, I probably had seen the VHS cassette, the kind of cover, the poster, which is beautiful. Um, but like it never really kind of sunk in. And I didn't, maybe I avoided it, maybe I just like pushed away from it, rejected it. I think Black Christmas in of itself is an odd kind of title, and I know that like there's actually been different titles for like there was like a TV airing of it in the US, and
Yeah.
they called it something completely different. And
Yeah. They called it Stranger in the House when it, yeah.
yeah. But I remember watching it. I'm also of a certain kind of temperament that like growing up all the way into adulthood, like a very kind of personal and special kind of occasion was always to just go to the video store by myself, rent a movie by myself, bring it home and watch it by myself. Like I would just watch horror movies, rent them and watch them. And I rented and watched um Black Christmas, and I had to be 16 or 17 years old, and it kind of came at a point where like when you're kind of like scratching the bottom, or like it's the bottom of the barrel, and you're like there's just not much out there that you haven't seen. Like you can say that you have seen all of the amazing movies, like the classics. Like there's there's nothing out there that you haven't seen that's gonna like blow your mind. Like,
Hmm.
of course, like you've seen everything, but then someone comes along and says, "Wait, have you ever seen this movie?" And you're like, no, but come on, really? Is it really gonna blow my mind?" Like, that's only happened to me twice in the last 20 years. Uh, in terms of something old, like new movies are coming out all the time that blow my mind, but like in terms of like a movie that has like existed, like that's The Pursuit. Like we're going to the video stores, digging through, renting everything to find the thing. And sometimes you'll see something fun, but it's like rare that you'll actually see the thing. And I swear to God, Black Christmas was the thing. Like it was like finding the Holy Grail. And I don't want to speak hyperbolic, but like I do feel like it genuinely kind of like affected me to the extent that it like changed my life. Like as a horror film fanatic, like there is life for me before Black Christmas, and now there's life after Black Christmas. And yeah, I love it. I love it.
So it's interesting that you mentioned, because I was sort of the last video store generation.
Hmm.
Um like video stores were dying when I was going and renting stuff at video stores, but I was trying to keep them alive because the experience, like you said, of hunting for things.
Yeah.
And like I lived in a very small town, and our nearest video store was quite small. And I had done the experience of like I've seen every Halloween movie, every Nightmare on Elm Street, every Friday the 13th. I've seen all the horror movies I recognize. Now, what's the stuff that I don't recognize? And sometimes you find something great, and sometimes you find something that you're like, well, I understand why no one talks about that one. But Black Christmas, the way that this is also going to date me, the way that I found out about Black Christmas was the now internet famous TV special Bravo's 100 Scariest Movie Moments, which came out in, I don't remember if it was 2003 or 2004, but I probably saw it in 2004 because I think I was at least 18 by the time I watched this. And it was kind of a bummer because they would spoil all of these moments, but
Yeah,
they would
yeah.
only show you the one moment from the movie, and then you would go find the rest of the movie. And I discovered, because I came to horror late. I was not allowed until I was like 16 and had my own car and my own money. That was when I could go rent horror movies. So I was catching up. And so this was an invaluable resource. And I was like, I got to see, okay, this movie over here, I've never heard of it, but I'll go see it. Audition. That was where I found out about Audition, you know?
Wow.
And Black Christmas popped up, and it was the scene which I'm sure we'll talk about. It was the very first kill in the movie, the bag over the head kill.
Yeah.
And I was like, that's very upsetting. I have to, and this is a Christmas movie. I have to know about this. And it was at that time, and you kids don't know how good you have it with all the stuff that Shudder and Screambox and other people are curating for you, because my video store did not have Black Christmas. I could not find it. I couldn't find it at the other nearest video store or the video store after that. I had to go buy the DVD on eBay because I couldn't find it anywhere near me. And granted, I lived in like a rural area, so it was a little harder of a hunt, but I went and bought this thing rather than rent it because I knew like this is something. And then I found out that Bob Clark was the same director who a few years later, like a decade or so later, made A Christmas Story, that movie that's on for 24 hours every Christmas in America. And I was like, whoa, really? He made this before he made that? And I knew from the opening frames the atmosphere of it's just a static shot of that house, and it's snowy and the Christmas lights are in the trees and Silent Night is playing,
Mhm.
and that title card comes up. I was like, oh yeah, this is my shit. Like I'm never going back. This is absolutely what I want. And I got it, and it still is, despite the number of times I see it, and I try to watch it every Christmas at this point, despite the number of times I see it, it is still one of the most like viscerally affecting movies, which, and we'll talk about why, but it still just kind of creeps right into my gut and kind of sits there every time I
Mhm.
see it.
It is an upsetting movie. It's
Yeah.
genuinely unnerving. And I think that's the staying power of it. Like, beyond being one of the kind of earlier slashers and predating Halloween. 74, you think about it, isn't that the same year that Texas Chainsaw Massacre comes out?
Mm-hmm.
That's a wild year. But
Yeah.
I think that, like, you mentioned A Christmas Story, and I think like we need to pay lip service to Bob Clark, because I think this man, you know, the same man who's responsible for two of the kind of preeminent like Christmas holiday movies, like, also Porky's. Like
Porky's.
I feel like Bob Clark has had such a kind of, a variety of his output is just so kind of oddly kind of eccentric that I just marvel at it. But like, just kind of focusing in on Christmas Story and Black Christmas, you know, imagine. And I grew up watching A Christmas Story. I felt like I was this close to Black Christmas all along, and I just didn't know it. Like, I was just kind of, I went down the wrong Bob Clark road,
Yeah.
and ended up in Ralphie Land. Which, I mean, I love that movie. That movie is, like, it still kind of rings, all the right bells for me. But that Black Christmas is this film that predates it. Like, who in their right mind would give Bob Clark permission to do Christmas Story after, I mean, after Black Christmas, let alone Porky? It's like, it just seems like such a, like, who was the studio head that was like, yeah, let's get Bob Clark to do that one.
It is remarkable, and But one of the things that I love about Black Christmas, and by the way, listeners, like this movie is 50 years old. We're gonna spoil it. So if you somehow haven't seen it, it's on Peacock, and I think it's on Prime Video too, like or AMC Plus or one of those. Like, go
Yeah,
watch it.
Shudder's got it.
You're missing out. It's there. Um, One of the things that immediately struck me about it is how and some of this just has to do with the power of actual film, actual celluloid capturing images in the 70s and 80s. They look similar. The way that
Yeah.
he uses light and shadow and the way that he creates darkness to sort of emphasize the brightness of the incandescent Christmas lights and the way that he makes the inside of that house. This is part of what makes it so effective. When we get to this sorority house where all of these young women are going to be killed, it feels Christmassy. It
Mm.
feels warm and friendly and fun, and you get a sense of the humanity of each of these young women, and you understand where they're coming from in their lives, and it feels like a party you want to be at until the phone rings, or I guess until you see but the thing about it that it struck me as I rewatched it a couple of days ago is it takes three shots for the killer to show up in this
Mm.
movie. This is not a like, oh, we're gonna slow burn this. We're not gonna tell you what's happening. It's just gonna start being weird. First shot is a static establishing shot of the house. Second shot is this beautiful tracking shot where he follows one of the girls into the front door and then just pans the camera around the windows. And all the Christmas lights are lit and it's very pretty and nice and fun. And then the next shot is a POV shot of a man sneaking around the front door, leering at them, and then climbing into their attic on a trellis.
Yeah. And but that in of itself, and I feel like, we have to pay lip service to this idea that like this was 74. This was 1974. Uh so this is 4 years before Halloween,
Yeah.
and I'm not kind of well versed enough to kind of to give credit where credit's due in terms of like if there was something before or something after that kind of predates Black Christmas, but I feel like the kind of killer POV in this one, the first person kind of focus, uh, is used so well. Um, like that, you know, I think anyone who watches it now will kind of not realize that this came, if it wasn't one of the first, if it wasn't the first, it was definitely like very early in this idea of like the slasher cam, the slash, like the killer cam, like that motif of like we're kind of in like entrenched in this like perverted man's point of view. um and I just think like you have to kind of give credit where credit's due, that like this movie predated everything. And it was there, it was at the beginning of it all.
Yeah, I mean the one that comes to mind that predates it that was an influence on slasher cam is Peeping Tom.
Yeah.
But the difference contextually there is Peeping Tom is a movie about a cameraman.
Yeah.
So you get the POV shots because he is literally operating a camera as he films his murders. Um, for me, and Steve, if Stephen Graham Jones were here, I promise you he would have a more nuanced answer. But for me, Black Christmas is the slasher movie that codifies so many things about what slashers are going to be.
Yeah.
Slasher cam is a big one. It's not the only one, but excuse me. It does so much to sort of lock in that idea. And apparently, I wrote a piece. I just kind of went back and skimmed it. I wrote a piece for Mental Floss a few years ago about this movie. I think for the 45th anniversary about the facts behind the making of it. And apparently, the POV thing started as Bob Clark. Bob Clark had the idea that he did not want to show you who the killer was.
Hmm.
He wanted and his and you can do that other ways, obviously. Like you can show the hands of the killer but never the face, or you can put him in a mask, or you can do all this other stuff. But he didn't want to reveal who this guy was, and one of the ways to get around revealing is to shoot the kills from mostly from his point of view. And shout out to I'm going to look up the cameraman's name really quick. Um, Burt Dunk is the name of the killer who is the name of the cameraman who had to build a special rig to keep the camera not just in front of his body, but he had to be able to operate it hands free so he could climb that trellis because he is actually climbing the trellis in that scene.
That's
So
amazing.
he had to design, this was pre Steadicam, he had to build a rig to keep the camera on his body so he could climb that thing. So shout out to Burt Dunk for creating one of the most, and it sets the tone. It's such a great, like within 5 minutes you have this idea of like it's Christmas time. Everybody's supposed to be happy. School's out. People are getting ready to go home for Christmas. They're giving each other presents. They're drinking. They're having a nice time. But also, there's a deranged maniac in the attic who is going to strike one of them at any moment. And Bob Clark is able to hold that balance throughout the entire movie up until the very end because like there's a Christmas party they do for underprivileged kids at one point in the middle of this movie. There's like a weird tense dinner that they have with the father of one of the girls who's gone missing. So he keeps up the weird, like this is where I think the Christmas Story thing came from, is like he keeps up the sort of weird awkward humor
Hmm.
of like, hey, this isn't a perfect Christmas, let's just get through it.
Yeah.
And it's there alongside some of the most upsetting things you've ever seen.
Uh, um, it's a very Canadian movie.
It is.
I, it's so funny to see, all of these actors that were in the kind of Cronenberg stable,
Mm-hmm.
or, like if you watch it with this kind of perspective of someone who's like seen it all, you'll be like, oh, here's that, that's the phone guy. He was in that, Scanners, or he was in, that other movie by Cronenberg, or oh, that's Art Hindle. He was the guy in, Dead Zone. Like,
Yep.
um, not to mention like Andrea Martin, or what is it, Dulia? I've never pronounced
Here's Alea, yeah.
Keir Dullea, like, y-
Alea, yeah.
um, but even like the deep cuts of like, uh, l- did you ever see Curtains?
Yes. Love that movie.
It's an amazing movie, right? Well,
One of the freakiest slasher masks ever
yeah,
in Curtains, yeah.
something about Canadians and their like wintry slashers, like that
Mm-hmm.
one. But the girl, I think the first victim, right? Like, is that she's in it, if I'm not mistaken.
She's in Curtains. Um, yeah, let
Has
me
to be.
look at this. Her name is Lynn Griffin.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
She is in Curtains, yes.
I think she is the. I'm not
Yeah.
gonna. Yeah, I won't spoil Curtains, but
Yeah, she is one of the leads in Curtains, yes.
yeah. I mean, like, you know, Olivia Hussey, you got your Juliet, Margot Kidder, you've got your Lewis Lane, John Saxon, like, all these like heavyweights, but like I just love the kind of Canadian quality to it. Like, it's like, you know, oh, that's the comedian from SCTV, or like
Yep.
what's that person doing? Like, you're just having this kind of like Canadian who's who, a Canuck who's who.
Well, it's funny because there are bits like in the police station in particular, like they put American flags on some of the desks in the police
Yeah.
station, and apparently that was just like American distributors are more attracted to movies that are supposedly set in America, and they never specify what city it's taking place in, but they shot it in Toronto. And one of the reasons they shot it in one of the ways you can tell that this is Toronto is a like no one's talking about the big football game or going to practice football. They're talking about hockey.
Yeah.
And also, when they have to do the big search through the park for the missing girls, they use snowmobiles. They're not just like running around. There are snowmobiles and hockey and all that kind of stuff. It's definitely a very Canadian movie. But the funny thing about that I remember from my research is they shot it in the winter. I think the winter of '73 in Toronto, and they didn't have enough snow. So they kept having to come up with fake snow to make it look snowy enough, and then they had to keep all the crew away from the snow so that there wouldn't be footprints
Yeah.
leading places. So it was apparently a hard time to get like a true wintry scene, but they made it work.
Yeah. That's phenomenal.
Yeah,
Um, yeah, it's funny that you mentioned hockey. Like you only notice this after having watched decades worth of horror movies. But like one of the kind of establishing shots of this one character is like a, he's like playing hockey, but he's wearing the hockey mask, like
yeah,
and you watch that now, and it doesn't look anything like Jason Voorhees, but you see it and you're like, oh, hockey mask, Jason Voorhees. So like even it's almost like you can retcon slasher vocabulary in a movie that you know I don't think Sean Cunningham watched Black Christmas and was like, or Steve Miner were like, hey, you know what? We got to put a hockey mask on Jason, and they did it in Black Christmas. But I just find it so funny, and just the irony of like, here's this movie that's been out for years that has all these little kind of signifiers and signs in it, and almost kind of did it before everybody else did, all the other slashers.
yeah. And it's got it has this it has the whodunit aspect,
Yeah,
which is present in like Friday the 13th and later stuff like Scream, where and it does a good job of the whodunit aspect because it genuinely makes the characters think that maybe they know who the killer is at one point, because it turns out one of the girls is dating uh an asshole piano player. um it has that. It has the creativity of the kills, which is funny. I read that Bob Clark, when he read the original script, because the original script I don't think was set at Christmas. It was just the original script was essentially When a Stranger Calls. It was
yeah,
it's the urban legend of the babysitter and the man upstairs. The calls are coming from inside the house. That was sort of the premise for the original script, and then it sort of morphed with another writer, and then Bob Clark got his hands on it, and it started to kind of shift, and eventually it became a Christmas thing. But he apparently didn't want it to be super violent. And to his credit, it's not super violent in the sense that there's not a lot of blood, there's not really any overt gore, maybe a couple of shots, but the kills, the way they're shot, and the implements that are used, that opening when Claire goes upstairs and he's in the closet and he just kills her with the dry cleaning bag is still. You mentioned the poster. That's on the poster. The original poster. It is beautiful because it's got the wreath and
yeah,
the Black Christmas fonts and all this stuff. And I think this also one of my favorite taglines in the history of film. If this movie doesn't make your skin crawl, it's on too tight, which is such a weird thing to come up with. Uh, but I have multiple times come across T-shirts that reproduce the poster, and I love the
yeah,
movie so much that I think about buying the T-shirt, and then I realize that it has Claire with the bag on her head, sitting in the rocking chair, and I don't buy it because I'm like, I don't want to wear that out and like see
yeah,
because like it upsets me, and I watch horror movies like every day. I don't even want to know what it would do to like my aunt or
yeah. You bring up When a Stranger Calls. I want to talk about that because I do feel like I don't know this, but did When a Stranger Calls come out prior to Black Christmas?
I believe it's after. I'm gonna look this up because this is a an interesting. Yeah, it's 5 years later was When a Stranger Calls.
That blows my mind. I mean, that's the thing. That's another one of these concepts where it's like, I mean, the movie is 50 years old, and you think about like the notion of the urban legend. And it was an urban legend at that point. I
Mm-hmm.
know Bob Clark has even kind of talked about it where it's like, they took the old chestnut of the calls are coming from inside the house. Like that existed. And y- you know, it sustains itself in such a way that like going what over an hour and a half of of that milking that concept so
Mm-hmm.
that when you get to the final payoff of the calls are coming from inside the house, Jess, like you gotta go, um it I think that it rings true definitely for people at that point in 74, it rang true for me in, in the late 90s when I first saw it, even though like I had already seen, When a Stranger Calls. I of course I knew the urban legend of, the
Hmm.
babysitter. Um, but it is, and there was even this other film, I think that came out in 81 called Student Bodies. Have you ever heard of Student Bodies?
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Kind of like a proto slasher comedy, like horror comedy,
Hmm.
that like a meta horror that like kind of does what Scream does, or maybe more like Scary Movie, of just like lampooning the
Hmm.
horror movies of the time. But it like it almost does the kind of intro uh in such a way that it's like, I don't know, like it just I want to advocate you to see Student Bodies if you haven't, because, or at least for the first 10 minutes, because I love it. Um, but yeah, I think that Bob Clark should also get credit for the sustaining of tension, that there is such a level of patience with his murders, um, that you actually end up, like the tension is just very palpable. Like, if we want to talk about that first kill, like I feel like it is almost, I mean, it's like a near masterclass in just kind of sustaining that kind of that tension until it snaps. And even then, like it's so hard to breathe watching it
Yeah,
happen.
yeah. It's
My
it's
skin was on
very
too tight.
yeah. Um, When a Stranger Calls is interesting. It's interesting. They both take that same urban legend, but When a Stranger Calls is funny because the first 30 minutes are the urban legend, and then the rest of the movie is like this weird trauma revenge thing
Hmm.
with Carol Kane, who is, and Charles Durnings's in that movie too, who I also love.
Yep.
And then Black Christmas, like you said, it is a 90-minute payoff. It is a 90-minute setup to that payoff.
Yeah.
And by the time the payoff hits, like that scene is so upsetting when the guy, because he's trying to keep her calm, so he says, "I need you to listen to me. Leave the house right now. Go walk out the front door right now. Can you do that?" And she's like, "Yeah, I'll go get my friends." And he freaks out and he goes, "No, don't do anything. You have to leave the house." And of course she gets upset, and then it builds to the moment when he tells
Yeah.
her what's happening. But that moment of like, I need you to leave the house right now. And the way, I guess we have to get into it because this is the thing that got us talking about this when we were talking about session 9. The one of the key ways that that tension is sustained is through the phone calls,
Yeah.
which are, again, I have watched this movie a lot. I've seen it at least 20 times at this point, probably more. Those phone calls are nightmare fuel
Yeah.
on a level that I don't know that any other movie has replicated for me that sort of auditory thing. Any other, I can't think of any other horror film where if you just say the phone calls in Black Christmas, I will hear those sounds in my head, those sounds that sound like they are coming from a pit into hell itself.
Yeah.
I will think about that and just be like, oh
Yeah.
God. And it's unbelievable. It's an incredible piece of horror storytelling, those
Yeah.
calls.
I the phone calls are the movie as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
There's so much to like appreciate and love about Black Christmas, but I would say the nested doll of those phone calls, the kind of story within a story. Uh, you if you almost kind of cut out, like just trimmed off all of the kind of extraneous fat and just kept the phone call, like strung the phone calls together in a single kind of like loop, it tells its own story.
Yeah.
And it is, I don't know, like it I just marvel at it. Like it is, to me, kind of quintessential horror storytelling, because you assume, there's this whole framing device of the sorority sisters, that it's Christmas, there's a serial killer, like, dispatching all of these girls one by one. But put all of that aside. Just get rid of it. And you have a story of a brother and a sister and the kind of relationship therein between Billy and Agnes and the parents, the like this nuclear family, this mom, dad, brother, sister, and it is it is truly a nightmare. It is like just the sheer kind of like uh trauma that exists within those phone calls. Because then you realize that these phone calls are being delivered in theory, in story, by one person.
Yeah.
But it is, when you listen to them, it sounds like an ensemble of, like like it, it reminded me a lot of The Exorcist, where it's like you've got
Mm-hmm.
this kind of like dubbing of multiple voices and kind of like all these this kind of overlaying sounds, and it there's something to be said about, and I wish I knew who did it, but like the person, whoever sculpted these phone calls deserves an Academy Award as far as I'm concerned, because it was some of the most affecting, disarming, unnerving sound design that I've ever heard. Ever
Yeah.
heard, And that's the legacy of Black Christmas to Session 9, where it's like, if you listen to the story within a story, like that, the meat of it, the thing at the kind of like what is giving Billy this trauma, like who is this killer? Like there's like that story, that thread is just so it just that's the movie. That's the movie
Yeah.
to me.
It's the I don't know everything about the phone calls. I do know that Bob Clark had and he's talked about, there are videos online of him talking about this at like horror conventions before he died. You can go watch them. He concocted the sort of Billy Agnes backstory. Like he understood. It starts with a bedrock understanding of who the guy is, because one of the brilliant things about the movie is we don't ever learn the identity of the killer or his true motive or his complete backstory, but you get the sense that the filmmakers know everything about this guy. And Bob
Mhm.
Clark did develop this backstory about Billy and Agnes and about this sort of murder, this sort of I don't know what you call it when you kill your sister. Killing your brother is fratricide,
So
but
yeah.
this sort of sibling murder and this abusive family and that whole situation. He had that all in his head, and I have no idea if the phone calls were scripted or if they were given sort of key phrases that they were supposed to say. I know I've read that Bob Clark did some of the voices, but the key voice, the Billy voice, was done by an actor named Nick Mancuso.
Hmm.
And he said that the way that he got it to sound so upsetting was when he recorded it standing on his head or like sitting, sort of sitting upside down in a chair, because he wanted to compress his airway to create like that croaking thing and that thing where occasionally Billy sort of drops into this weird, wavering whisper, like when he says, "Agnes, it's me, Billy." Like that was him like compressing his entire airway so that he could make it sound eerier. So, like, shout out to Nick Mancuso for delivering the voice. But yeah, it is this feeling of, and it's not just that there's a whole story in those phone calls. It's that the story starts to change the more that he observes the girls.
Mhm.
That is the most upsetting part to me, because he's there the whole time. Like he's in the house. We get periodic, even when he's not killing people, we get periodic glimpses. He's still up in the attic, or he sneaks down into I think it's Phil's bedroom or somebody's bedroom to use the phone. Like we even see that at one point. And so he is very aware of everything that's going on in the house, which makes it more frightening in that sort of ghost face kind of way, because he knows he's freaking them all out. And he clearly is relishing it. And he starts to add to his performance to the point that a key point in the story is that Jess, Olivia Hussey's character, is pregnant by her boyfriend Peter and wants to have an abortion. And Peter is very angry about this and criticizes her for what he feels is the sort of callous way that she decides she wants to terminate a pregnancy, and says something about, you're talking about it like you're having a mole removed. And then Billy says that to her on the phone. He says, It's like having a mole removed." And Jess freaks out. And then John Saxon is like, "Did you hear something you recognized?" And she has to go, "No, nothing. What's going on?" And that sort of cat and mouse thing where he just keeps, he wants them to understand him in a certain way, but he also wants to toy with them, and it becomes this crazy evolution right up to those last moments, which remain some of the most chilling things that any horror film has ever done.
You know, I've I've probably watched this. If I haven't watched it 20 times, I've watched it 18 times.
Mm,
And, on recent this last viewing, I actually had a certain level of empathy for Billy because I think of I mean, he's clearly an unwell individual and,
hmm
it's not so great that he's murdering everybody. But, at the core of him, you know, whatever he did to Agnes, like you just get this sense of like the family dynamic is not a healthy one.
Yeah,
And it's a bit chicken and egg whether that started with him or something external. Like, him coming into this house, you know, I there was something about those moments where like and it's probably like one of the last phone calls where he's just like going through this litany of like like he performs as every character, his mother, his father, and like he's kind of spitting back dialogue that whatever he said to them. But there's this one moment where he's just like, "Mommy, mommy," and it's just like my heart kind of like in that way that Leatherface is a like a sympathetic character that like you
yeah,
feel like it's like these people are kind of the products of their family upbringing, their dying like it is definitely I would say nurture rather than nature. Um, but like my heart kind of broke for him, filthy Billy,
yeah.
and it's just, I don't know, like, it's so rare to watch a movie that kind of like unfolds to you, like the more you watch it. And I think that like, if I ever need a quick fix of like trauma, I'll just put on Black Christmas because those calls, they just like, I mean, like I'm breathless just thinking about them. Like I honestly, I hold them up to such high regard because the craftsmanship behind them and the way that the story is told through audio. This movie doesn't need violence. It doesn't need gore. Um, the few random, like I think there are like three like overt deaths, three like murders that are on screen
Yeah,
that
the
like
big ones. There are three. Yeah.
yeah, and they're great. I do think the first one, the clear plastic tarp is certainly my favorite, but I would argue that like it's what he does that like this movie kind of exists in the kind of trauma. Uh, that's the violence of the film for me.
It is, and it's. I wanted to go back to what is. I always. It's weird when you watch a movie so many times and you think you know it back to front, and there's always something that you forgot that sneaks up on you and has you going, "Oh, damn." And it's at the very beginning of the film. It's like the first phone call, because this is clearly like Billy is someone who hates women.
Hmm.
He is angry at women. He wants to kill women. He hates women, and it's a movie that emphasizes like these women are surrounded by men who, if they don't hate them, then they at least think they're being hysterical. Um, and that it's you know pretty progressive for a 1974 film, and the 2019 remake played that up in a big way, and I really like that film. But anyway, the most chilling thing at the beginning of the movie the one time that his sort of trauma breaks, because that's the other thing about these phone calls is they're terrifying, and he's clearly toying with these girls, and he's clearly putting on some kind of a performance, but the core of it is I am in pain. Like I hate everything about myself and my situation. Like there is clear like anguish in his voice, except the one time that one of the girls claps back at him,
Mhm.
because Barb, Margot Kidder's character, the outspoken smartass one, gets on the phone with him and starts like insulting him back. And his response to that at first is to keep doing the creepy sexual stuff. And then he just, in the calmest voice imaginable, just says, I'm going to kill you. And then the line goes dead. And that's such a, I don't even know how well it fits with the rest of the phone calls, to be honest with you. It's such an odd little blip compared to everything else, but it is so fascinating to me that like that's
Yeah.
the choice they made, because at no point elsewhere in the movie does he reach that point of just like rationally saying what's happening. And I've always wondered about that. It's so creepy and so odd to me.
Yeah. There's I have a certain level of denial where I want to believe. I discredit that first phone call. I almost want to believe that it's someone else, that it's not Billy. And I know that's not true. I know that I think the movie gives you enough, like, the movie doesn't spoon feed you answers, but like all of the calls, like they say, "Oh, it's the moaner again."
Yeah.
Like that they've kind of established that someone is calling, has been calling them. So like already there's like an established pattern. Um and I think Margot Kidder like said like he's like bulked up his act or something like that.
Hmm.
Like they're used to him. They've tolerated him, but like it is the escalation of it that you know, I don't know. It's interesting because we kind of enter into the story uh, that's already commenced. That this process is kind of well underway. Um, yeah, and even to the extent where I think like someone like during that first phone call, like they say, like, can that be just one person? Like like
Yeah.
all the voices are just so coming at such a clip that it sounds choral almost.
Yeah. Um, so you mentioned I do want to point out one other high point of this film, because you mentioned shortcomings, and I think it'll be fun to kind of needle at this movie a little bit. But I did want to mention just at the core of my like slasher heart, uh Jamie Lee Curtis will always be my final girl. Like I am on record. Halloween 1978 is my favorite movie. Laurie Strode is my favorite final girl, but Olivia Hussey as Jess Bradford in this movie is fantastic. Like Margot Kidder is the clear scene stealer. Like she's the ringer they brought in to like
Yeah.
get all the best lines, and like she at one point she just I think my favorite line in the movie on rewatch was when she just Claire is being dramatic about about Barb being a little too provocative, and Barb just says, "I know a professional virgin when I see one," which is a great line. But despite like Margot Kidder being the scene stealer, Olivia Hussey has this steel in her that makes her a great final girl, even though like she never like fights the killer. She never really like there's one moment where she kind of pushes him away with the door, but
Hmm.
she doesn't get into a fight with him. She doesn't like kill him. She's not out there like being a badass like Nancy in Nightmare on Elm Street, or Sidney Prescott in Scream. She's just trying to get through it and trying to live her life. And anyway, I just love that performance a lot.
Yeah. Um, I mean, I do think that it's kind of accidentally progressive. That you mentioned this idea of like, you know, the women at the core of this movie are kind of beset on all sides. Nobody believes these women. Nobody will listen to these women. When they say this is what they want to do, the men all say no, and it's just kind of, you know, I think for its time, I almost want to say it feels ahead of its time, that it was progressive in this kind of Roe v. Wade, you know, I don't know, like it just, it was thinking about things.
Yeah,
Um, Whether it puts a button on it or a bow, like, but I do think it at least was having a conversation when I have to imagine not many people were, not in
yeah,
movies, not in horror movies. My God.
yeah. And we also have to talk about. We were talking earlier about the way this movie sort of codifies certain slasher things with slasher cam, and the girls who misbehave
Hmm.
tend to die. Whereas well, that's actually not quite true because Claire is sort of the professional virgin, right? But
Mhm.
Jess, who has clearly had sex, lives, but it does codify the sort of final girl idea, except one of my favorite touches in this movie is it is the rare slasher film where you never get a killer reveal. You never
Yeah.
find out who this guy is. And not only do you never find out who he is, the film ends by telling you he's still in the damn house,
Yeah.
which is so amazing. I love it so much.
Okay. I have a theory that I feel like is actually supported by the movie.
Okay.
And that is, and this is not revelatory, but, you know, every time someone is murdered, the next thing that happens is that there's a phone call. And I think that no one survives. I don't think Olivia Hussey lives by the end of the film. And that is because of the pattern that is established of death, phone call, death, phone call. And that like the end is that the phone begins to ring one last time.
Yes, I think you're right. I do think that that's what happens. Like for all that, I love Jess, and I think she's amazing. But I do think because by the end of the movie, she's not just asleep in her house. She's sedated. Like they have put her out.
Yeah.
They tell everyone like she's not gonna wake up until tomorrow afternoon, man. She's out. She just went through like her boyfriend got shot by the cops. She's not, or is that even what? Anyway, her boyfriend's dead. She found all of her friends' bodies in the house. She's not gonna be okay for a while. But again, in keeping with the movie of like she is surrounded by shitty men, and instead of these shitty men going, we should take her to a hospital, they're like, nah, she's fine here. This is her bedroom. We'll just let her sleep it off and we'll put an officer outside. And you're right, that is the pattern. And you also get that shot at the end where the attic, the trap door to the attic just starts to
Yeah.
slowly open, like he's
Yeah.
glancing down, like is anyone still in there?
Yeah.
And the thing that makes me think that your theory is correct is not just the pattern repeating. It's if you look at the last shot, the establishing shot of the house, it shows you see the house, there's a police officer standing on the front porch. The phone starts to ring. That police officer sort of turns, like he sort of half turns his body. He's standing like facing the street and he sort of pivots like phone's ringing. Should I go inside and get that phone? That might be something. I don't know. Should I go? Like he has that moment of just like, huh, phone's ringing. And then he just turns back and you
Yeah.
never get a resolution to that. Like I do think that like yeah, Jess dies and they either catch or kill Billy eventually, or, they don't do either of those things, and Billy just slips out down the trellis
Yeah.
and goes to another house.
I mean, I think what the movie is ultimately saying is that putting your faith in authority figures is the wrong call. That
Yeah,
like,
it's very sort of counterculture in that way, and like it's sort of emphasized by the sort of artwork that all the girls have on their walls. It's that
yeah,
kind of movie for sure.
yeah, all the men, even John Saxon, who I think is like a very kind of sympathetic guy. He's trying to do right. But like all the police officers, all the teachers, all the like everybody just does these women wrong and they die for it. Like, like at the end of the day, like it, you know, the capacity for like terrible, terrible things to happen in your own home and you're not even aware of it. And it's just like, it's like the inevitability of Billy, I think is just, it's made like the men in this movie are complicit in that in a way, um, which it just kills me.
Yeah. So I want to ask because you mentioned shortcomings in this movie, and
Yeah.
I'm very curious, like what your take is on that.
All right. Well, I have twofold, and I feel like it needs to break down. I feel like there's the shortcomings of the movie, and then I think there's the shortcomings of the legacy of the movie.
Mm,
And I think the shortcomings of the movie, you know, I think this goes for any slasher film, but the comedy never holds up to me, for me. Like
mm.
I always find that like the you know, Bob Clark, God bless him. Like it feels so maudlin. Only Margot Kidder, who is sharp and acidic, like her comedy lands because it's just on a different level. But I can't remember the name of the school marm, the house mother. Um, but
Yeah,
like
Mrs. McHenry. Yeah.
it's just so big and so broad. I just don't feel like it exists tonally with the rest of the movie. And it's like clearly there to give comic relief. And this film, I feel, is suffocating enough that like I reject the comic relief of this film.
Well, and it's an odd choice anyway because like a big part of her comic relief is that she hides bottles of sherry around the house and drinks. And it's an odd choice because the girls are drinking in full view of her. Like no one would judge her for having a drink at Christmas, but like Margot Kidder, excuse me, is hitting the whiskey throughout this film. And this woman, I guess that she thinks that she has to be respectable and like put on a respectable face because she's the den mother or
Yeah.
whatever. And but it is just an odd, like, you know what's funny though? I think about this sometimes. That role was originally the actress, I want to credit her. Her name is Marion Waldman, who played the role. The role was offered to Betty Davis. And I on the one hand I want to see that movie, but on the other I'm sort of glad it didn't happen because if you had Hagsploitation Queen at that point, Hagsploitation Queen Betty Davis as the house mother in this movie, like it would totally like it would steal the movie. It would take you even more away from what's going on with the girls because you'd just be like, that's Betty Davis.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, yeah, that's my big foible with the film. I, I do find the kind of who done it like like as a motor, like the this is the thing that is like pushing the story, the narrative forward. This idea of like who is murdering these women, and is it the boyfriend? Is it not the boyfriend? Like we know it's not the boyfriend, but like they kind of posit these kind of red herrings to kind of, I don't know, make you maybe perhaps believe, it's like a wart being removed, like, I at no point did I assume like could it have been the boyfriend? Like
Yeah.
it's not the boyfriend. Like so you're just like waiting for the women and like the characters, the protagonists to kind of catch up to what essentially you already know.
Yeah.
Which I think is just kind of wasted screen time.
So I'm very curious about your thoughts about the legacy of the movie because that's an interesting thing to talk about.
Yeah. Well, I mean, what are your shortcomings? Like, do you have any shortcoming, like any kind of
I
things that
think
you,
I think you're right. Like I'm more willing to I kind of like the Sherry thing. I think it's just kind of cute. But it is like a weird little appendage in this movie that feels like it was maybe from an earlier version or something.
yeah.
Um I will say too that if you want a movie with a better, like the best sorority house mother on film is Carrie Fisher in the House on Sorority Row remake, which is
Yes.
one of
That's
the
a
best.
great movie.
Yeah, that is one of the best horror remakes ever made. Is
Yeah.
that Sorority Row movie? It's really good, and the original House on Sorority Row is also great. But
It
anyway,
is. It is.
I do think that that is sort of an odd, especially when you have so much humor inherent in the girls and the way that they relate to each other and play off each other. And you have that whole monologue where Margot Kidder is talking about turtles that screw for 3 hours or whatever it was. Um,
She goes to see the
and
zebras.
and I think it's a funny, and then, I mean, you even have the moments where the cops are like making fun of each other for like blundering over stuff, which is both funny and adds to the idea that the cops really aren't taking this that seriously
Yeah, yeah,
because they're joking around and doing Christmas stuff at the police station, and they're just like, ah, whatever. These girls are just, it's just a prank call or whatever.
yeah,
So I don't really think you need it, and I um. I love a slasher who done it, but the Peter thing, I think the point of Peter as a character is that he is so casually cruel and controlling to his girlfriend. I
yeah,
think that that makes him enough of a villain in the piece because, like we said, this is a movie about women surrounded by shitty men.
yeah,
I think that making him a suspect is about as useful as like making John Saxon a suspect. Like it doesn't really do anything. It's just sort
yeah,
of like, oh, maybe. And I think, I guess it is useful at least a little from a character perspective in adding to Jess's general anxiety about the situation. And it gives you that sort of red herring ending. But even then, I'm just kind of like, the only real purpose it serves is for the cops to think that they got the guy so that
yeah,
it buys you the ending. It buys you the
yeah,
twist of like, well, they didn't get the guy. But at no point in the movie was I ever like, yeah, no, it could be Peter. It really could be. He's a guy making those crazy phone calls because it breaks all the rules of the way the perspective works in the movie. Like it would just be a complete denial of all the way that the film uses the killer.
yeah.
But legacy.
Legacy.
What are you thinking about it in terms of like slasher movies or Christmas horror movies? Like how do you think about the movie's legacy?
I think that this is a very complicated film, and it's made complicated by way of its fandom and by way of its remakes.
Mm.
And I think it's a great Christmas movie. I think it's a great slasher movie. Uh, it is probably the only horror movie that I am a fan of that I am very guarded about talking openly about my fandom because I feel like, particularly when the 2019 remake came out, that there was a certain kind of level of fandom, like toxic fandom,
Oh
that
yeah, yeah.
this movie brought out in a way that actually was it was really off-putting, and it made me kind of like, I mean, maybe a little ashamed to be as much of a fan, you know? And horror is like one of these very kind of, the potential for kind of self-reflexiveness is there in any fan in any genre. But when there's something that you hold near and dear, that you consider sacred, and something out there like a remake uh, challenges that kind of sacred quality, uh, whether or not you find fault in the remake for it versus just accepting it as kind of a way of life in Hollywood. That, like,
Yeah.
with these movies, like it, I was kind of taken aback by the level of vitriol and just the toxicity that was brought out by fans for this movie. And I am a fan of this movie. I love
Yeah.
this movie. And yet, like, and I do think that, to add to the complexity of it, I mean, I don't even we can have a sidebar conversation about the 2006 remake, which I find dreadful.
Yeah, I don't
And
like that movie.
it just I it misses it, I didn't necessarily need the backstory of Billy to be expanded and
Hmm.
become the movie, which I think
Yeah.
that remake does, and it becomes this kind of gothic kind of pervert, like, that movie, like, just it the ratio is so imbalanced of like Billy to sorority sisters that like it's just like what are we what are we watching? It was noble, and I would like if I had been given that assignment, I would probably do something similar. So I don't fault them for it, but it yeah, the less we say, I feel like the less we say about, you know, jaundice Billy, probably the better.
Yeah,
But with the 2019 remake, I you enjoyed it. You liked the remake.
I do like that movie, but the caveat is it is really for all the hate it got, and it got a lot of hate. And I have like it's very ironic that a movie, a slasher film about that is about the danger of misogyny, got so ended up with fans being so misogynistic toward particularly female film critics who enjoyed the 2019 film, and I know several of them who were on the
Hmm.
receiving end of that. I like the 2019 film. It's not a film that I would go rewatch a whole bunch, I don't think. It's
Hmm.
not one of those that I just keep thinking about. I enjoyed it, but with the caveat that it basically just keeps the title and the setting
Yeah.
of the original film. It's really not a remake so much as it's just like, oh, we're going to use this title and springboard into a whole different narrative, which I enjoyed.
Yeah. I f- I think that that concept of like we're gonna strip mine these pre-existing properties for their titles and for some version of their essential premise, like sorority sisters getting murdered at a college over Christmas. Like like I there's a sincere part of me that wishes the 2019 remake was called something other than Black Christmas,
Mm.
and that the merits of the film itself could have been assessed independently of the fandom of the original Black Christmas, because that fandom wasn't there to kind of like protest the 2006 remake. Like it
Yeah.
like it was something so specific to like taking a sacred cow and making it woke, or you know, which is kind of hilarious given that like, you know, here we are kind of speaking to the kind of like the gradual progressiveness of the 74 version, and
Yeah.
like it's, you know, I don't have anything to kind of back this up, but I feel like the filmmakers of the 2019 one saw the 74 one, felt compelled to kind of take what progressive qualities were in it and kind of further them, like push them. And you know, I just find the whole thing kind of unfortunate because it had it been called anything else, you know, that level of ire, that fandom wouldn't have come out. And I just found the whole thing so gross, and it made me kind of like, you know, I don't speak as openly about my fandom of Black Christmas anymore because I feel like the whole thing has been so sullied by way of the trolls and the kind of like the internet, you know, fandom kind of coming out and rejecting the remake, um, which I think is such a bummer because I can't say that I really enjoyed the remake that much either, but not for the reasons that are being kind of like,
Right, right. And then you run into that problem of you don't want to be lumped in with someone who just hates it for the sake of hate.
yeah,
You want to be able to talk about a movie as a piece of art independent of whatever else it's doing. And yeah, that is a big deal. Like, I mean, if you want someone to hate whatever you just did, no matter what it is, put Star Wars at the front of the title. And everyone, like, people will hate it. I don't know how many or where, but there will be people who hate it. And that's a just a yeah, the whole IP thing and the way that we latch onto this stuff and the way that a certain type of quote unquote fan will follow that
yeah.
to the ends of the earth in such a brutal way is always just gonna mire us in stuff that we don't want to get mired in.
But okay, the Ghostbusters remake predated Black Christmas remake. It had to. That
It
was
was
like,
It was about the same time. Yeah, it was like 3 years earlier. Yeah, it was 20.
Yeah.
I think that one was 2016.
So I feel as if like there was like this spate of films that like just became these like flashpoints of pop cultural toxicity because they were kind of flipping the script, like doing something different. Let's do Ghostbusters, but let's do it with women. And like I kind of liked the Ghostbusters. Um
Yeah, that's a fun movie.
it's fun, right?
Yeah.
And but like this idea that like all of a sudden fans have to somehow protect their sacred cows against this
Hmm.
this kind of like woke Hollywood mentality. I just found it so asinine.
Yeah.
And and you know, given the fact that Black Christmas kind of gets lumped into that kind of like moment of taking what we hold near and dear and like somehow undermining it or perverting it by distorting it and making it women. Like it just it, I just don't. I mean, I get it, but I don't get it. Like I just it sounds so silly to kind of say it this way, but like I find it so frustrating that like a film like Black Christmas, like why is that the sacred cow that like the ugliness of the internet suddenly kind of burbled up and took down this movie by this amazing independent filmmaker who had a pretty I mean, like a decent track record of like good films beforehand.
Yeah.
Like it just kills me that like this is this is the cross that these guys are going to die on.
Yeah.
This is the hill, and it's Black Christmas, and a movie that has been remade already, and like like it kind of defies a certain kind of goodwill that I wanted to believe the horror community at large has, but that like this kind of certain corner, this pocket of film fandom really it was just really gross.
Yeah. I will just say, like, Sophia Takal, April Wolf, you guys made a movie that I really like, and I'm sorry that things got so messy around it. But uh, before we let you go, Clay, I do. We've been talking for a while, but I do want to ask you about. I think I partially know the answer to this because you write audio dramas,
Hmm.
but I want to ask you what parts of Black Christmas do you feel you most carry with you in your own imagination and your work?
Oh, those phone calls are on a loop in my head all the
Hmm.
time. What your mother and I must know is, where did you put the baby? Where's
Hmm.
Agnes? Like,
Yep.
it's just like it's in there. But it's funny that you mentioned the Bravo thing. I'm surprised that it's the tarp scene and not the eyeball behind the door scene.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
that's I always thought that was the kind of iconic shot that like the camera kind of like pans up and like the eyeball is just there. It's like, "Psst, Agnes, it's me, Billy." Like that just
Hmm.
like, oh my God, like that moment. Whoa. Um, and ultimately the first kill, the first murder. Uh Margot Kidder's death with the crystal menagerie. It's
Yeah.
great. It's very tasteful. It's very, like it's artistic.
It's
Um,
very Mario Bava, that kill.
yeah, right? Very
Yeah.
giallo. But the plastic tarp is that scene. Oh my God. Because you have what's the girl again? Is it
Claire is the
Claire?
character.
Okay.
Yeah.
Claire goes into her room. She's packing up. She said goodbye to everybody at the party. Everybody is like, she's just like, she is now off the grid.
Yeah.
And she like is packing up her stuff and she opens the attic, her closet, turns on the light and then she goes back to her bed and she's packing. And you just got this like static shot of the the clear plastic tarps. I have a thing against clear plastic tarps. Like any kind of clear plastic goes back to ghost eaters. Like this is like my like anytime there's a clear plastic shroud, I think it's probably because of Black Christmas that like you see the fuzzy outline of Billy behind it. And you
Yes.
know he's there. You know he's there. And the scene just goes. Like I mean like there may be like one or two cuts, but it's like pretty like, you know, it's static.
It
Un-
lingers. Like you could have done that scene by you could show the bag going over her head and then cut to him carrying her up into the attic and we would all know what happened. But
yeah.
it does not do that. It hangs on it in a way that is so and then her face is just frozen that way
Yeah.
for the rest of the movie.
But isn't it amazing that like she's packing and then like she hears something and then she turns and she goes to the closet. She's like she's like 3 inches away from Billy. Like there is like
Hmm.
the only thing that is separating them is this clear plastic kind of shroud. And she's just staring at it for an extended amount of time. And just when like I mean because we all know that he's there, she is just like, is there someone behind there? And
Yeah.
like she's just looking and looking and looking, and then Billy erupts. And it's like that moment to me is sustained to such a snapping point that like it just is so profoundly unnerving.
Well, and the other interesting thing about it is the other two big kills. I mean, he kills four because Phil also dies, but Phil's death is not made as much of a thing in the
Yeah,
movie.
yeah,
When he kills Mrs. Mack, and he kills her with that amazing cargo hook, which
yeah,
I'm still not convinced of the physics of that thing, but we'll
yeah,
let it slide. In that scene and in the scene when he kills Barb, you see him holding the weapon, waiting for his moment. He straddles Barb in bed and holds it above her head and makes sure that she sees what he's about to do. He waits for Mrs. Mack to get her head up and look over at him before he lets go of the hook. With this, he is just sitting there. He's just standing there. He is just like he's just I dare you. Come closer.
yeah,
I dare you.
yeah,
I know exactly what I'm gonna do if you just walk 1 inch closer to this closet. And it's such a it's yeah it's an amazing and I mean like it's not clear plastic but it makes me think a little bit of Kill Your Darling and the way that you handle the kill in that like that's very similar
yeah.
in execution.
Ugh. Um, I know you want to go, but I can't let this slide. Like you said, Halloween is your favorite.
Oh, excuse me.
Halloween's your go-to, right?
It is my favorite horror film and it is up there with favorite films ever. Yeah.
Okay. So then can you at least talk briefly about the complex relationship between Bob Clark and John Carpenter and Halloween and Black Christmas and whether it's true? Like, do you genuinely believe that this is real? That this
I
like
mean,
is
so the lore here, if you don't know, listeners, is Bob Clark gave an interview at one point. I'm gonna go back to my mental floss piece here and see if I can find um let's see. So the thing about this is as far as I know, it's a one-sided story. I've never heard any corroboration from Carpenter. I've never heard any like, you know, any kind of like yeah that happened or anything like that from Carpenter's camp. But essentially, Bob Clark's story is that he was approached again. Black Christmas came out in '74. Halloween came out in '78. He was approached by John Carpenter, and John Carpenter said, "I love your movie Black Christmas. Did you ever think about like doing another one like that?" And Bob Clark said, "Well, I had this idea that maybe at the end of Black Christmas, they finally catch him and they capture him and they put him in a mental institution. And then, like a couple years later, he escapes and he goes after some more babysitters or some more young girls. And I would set it in October and I'd call it Halloween." That is Bob Clark's story, that he essentially handed the basic premise of Halloween as a potential Black Christmas sequel to John Carpenter. And to his credit, Bob Clark said, like, look, I'm not saying that I wrote Halloween. Like John Carpenter made Halloween. He deserves all the credit for making Halloween. I'm just saying we had that conversation one time. I'm not going to speak ill of the dead. Like Bob Clark is gone now. He's not here to defend himself. He's not here to repeat that story. So I'm not going to call him a liar. It may be true, it may not be true. John Carpenter, for his part, says that Halloween happened because Irwin Yablans, a producer, came to him and said, "I'll give you 300 grand to make a horror movie, and I want it to be about babysitters being stalked by a killer." And John Carpenter said, "Cool." And he and Deborah Hill came up with Halloween. And the thing about setting movies on holidays is at this point, um, it was a marketing tool where like because back then we didn't have home video. If you set a movie on a holiday, you could pretty much guarantee that you were going to get another check because theaters would rerun your movie on that holiday. So that's how you get stuff like Halloween and Friday the 13th and stuff like that. So I really don't know. I There's a lot of connective tissue, at least like structurally, but I kind of don't know. I don't know how much truth there is to that at all. It's a really interesting story, but I really have no, like I said, I don't want to accuse Bob Clark of lying, but I just kind of don't buy it, you know?
Yeah. Okay. You
I
would
just
know. I feel like you're the man. You're the link. You're the person who's kind of
I
like
mean, and hey,
bridging the
like
gap between these two movies.
if anyone has information that I don't have and you're listening to this, like correct me. I'm happy to learn more about this, but from what I could dig up, it was just a story that Bob Clark told one time that oh yeah, I talked to John Carpenter and I told him that the sequel would be called Halloween and then he went and made a movie called Halloween. So, you know. And, you know, Bob Clark's legacy is secure. He made two of the greatest Christmas movies ever. So, it's fine. But I
Fudge.
I do think that whether the story is true or not, I do think that Halloween would not be the film it is without Black Christmas.
Yeah.
I think that the whether Carpenter wants to whatever influence Carpenter wants to claim or not claim from that movie, it's there. It's there in the atmosphere. It's there in the sense of humor in the characters, which Deborah Hill had a lot to do with writing the young women as real people with inner lives and not just sort of stock characters who were going to be cannon fodder. Um, and it has that same sort of obviously the slasher cam is there, but Halloween is so much a if anything, it's a counter to Black Christmas because Black Christmas, like we talked about, is very much about a guy with this very disturbing backstory, and a clear sense of trauma in his life that he has now brought forward into inflicting trauma on others. Michael Myers is a cipher. Michael Myers is a ghost. He is in the text of Halloween at least, he is just a person who is compelled to kill, and he does not care to explain himself or stop or be reasoned with or to toy with you in any way other than maybe pretending to be your boyfriend for a minute so he can get close to you. So I think that they are different sides of the same slasher coin, but I think they're different enough that I don't
Mhm.
connect them that closely. So
Mm.
that was a very long-winded, almost non-answer, but there you go.
There it is. There it is.
Oh man, this has been a wonderful little holiday celebration. Clay, before we let you go, will you let everyone know what you have coming up and where they can find you online?
Oh, I got a new book called Wake Up and Open Your Eyes. And it's coming out January 7th, uh, wherever bookstores are still standing. And yeah, I'm just gonna be trying to convince people to to read the damn thing.
I am going to listen to every other interview you do and make sure that you sing the title
Oh my
just like
God.
you did. Now, you have to do it. I don't care. Like, if you go on Talking Scared, I'm gonna listen, and you better let me. Like, there was talk of you going on Tananarive podcast, which you
Yeah.
should do because that's a great show. You got to sing it for her.
All right.
Um, I want to hear it. Our guest has
Okay.
been Clay McLeod Chapman. Clay, it's always fun to talk to you. Thanks for being on the show.
Last podcast I'll ever do will be you. I was the first. I was the repeater. I will be the last.
We're
Damn it.
doing it. I'm bringing the mic to Clay's bedside. Hopefully, many, many, many years from now. But we will do it.
Slapping the bass. What were his last words? I think it was slapping the bass.
Clay loves this podcast so much he does not want to get off it, everybody. So,
Good night. Good night.
good night, everybody. Thanks once again to Clay McLeod Chapman for being on the show and for being our first ever return guest. It's always a blast to talk with Clay. I always feel great after chatting with him. Wake Up and Open Your Eyes is in bookstores everywhere January 7th. If you are Christmas shopping for the horror fan in your life, maybe pre-order the book for them, maybe pre-order it for yourself and give Clay a little holiday present in the process. You guys know the drill. You can find us at Scares Shaped Us on Blue Sky, at Scares Shaped Us on Twitter, Scares That Shaped Us on Facebook, Scares That Shaped Us on YouTube. We're all over the place. But I also wanted to say, since this is the last episode of 2024 for us, that I have been incredibly moved and encouraged and inspired by the response to this show over the 4 months that I've been doing it. It was sort of a spur of the moment thing. It was just a feeling of ripping off the band-aid and diving right into something that I'd been thinking about doing for a long time. And I have felt such a wonderful community starting to grow around this thing that we're doing. And I really appreciate it. My family really appreciates it. So whether you are a listener of the show, someone who follows us on social media because you think it's a neat idea, an author who has supported us, signal boosted us, appeared on the show, other podcasters, man, you guys have made a guy feel so welcome in this community of people who love talking about horror. I have felt so lifted up and encouraged by all of you. So I just want to say thank you. It's a really weird thing hoping that you maybe have something to offer people in a medium that you've never tried and not really being sure where things are going to land. But I felt the love from all of you pretty much right away, and it's never stopped, and I really appreciate it. And we've got some amazing stuff coming for you in 2025, beginning with a special two-part episode on New Year's Day. It's a double-sized New Year's special talking about the best horror stories of 2024. We have the amazing Gabino Iglesias to talk about the best horror books of 2024, and my dear friend, journalist, film critic, groomsman in my wedding, Russell Falcon, is going to be here to talk about the best horror movies of 2024. That will drop January 1st of 2025, and after that, boy, I'm excited to show all of y'all what we've been working on heading into 2025. We've got some great interviews with some great storytellers, and I can't wait. So have a great holiday. Take care of each other. Take care of yourselves. Merry Christmas. Happy holidays. Happy New Year. We'll see you in 2025. Until then, I'm Matthew Jackson, and you've been listening to The Scares That Shaped Us.